We good to get going? Awesome. How's it going? I'm Kelby. Yeah, one sec. Awesome. I'm Kelby. This is Mark. We do AppSec at Duo, and we're here to talk about application security programs. So the first part of our talk will be about application security programs in general, and then we'll dig into how we've implemented an AppSec program at Duo. So looking at some of the properties of like early stage security programs, you may enumerate what a low security maturity program looks like. So you have a lack of dedicated, you might have a lack of dedicated software security expertise on staff. However, you may have an overinflated perspective of what your actual security posture is. You might, and keyword might, be doing some like software security related work, like maybe penetration tests from a third party, but the value that you're getting from those may be limited, it may be unrealized, and it may be done with very inconsistent frequency. Additionally, coverage metrics, or just metrics in general, are sparse if they exist at all, and if they do exist, they are unlikely to be meaningful. So over time, this program may improve to what we're calling medium security maturity. So you may be hiring engineers that aren't necessarily security dedicated engineers, but they may have a security background or interest in computer security, and could confidently identify and execute on more tactical security activities. Maybe you start doing more regular or consistent annual third-party pen tests, but that's about the extent of the program's coverage, and efficacy or strength is measured in number of findings or lack of OWASP top 10 bugs. So there are obvious improvements here in the medium security maturity program over the low security maturity program. However, this program is still working very tactically and not really capturing the big picture of security within the organization. So ultimately, a program might evolve into a high security maturity stage where there's a dedicated team focusing on just AppSec work across the SDLC. The program itself is very self-aware and has a good sense of what its strengths and its deficiencies are, as well as processes that are in this program are very scalable, well-defined, and repeatable throughout the maturity model. So a key aspect of a high security maturity program is a dedicated application security team. And so we want to enumerate what this might look like within a particular organization. So we've identified about 4 key roles that we think make up an application security team. The first 2 are an application security analyst and an application security engineer. These are the lower level in the weeds roles. Collectively, they are handling all security defects that come from internal sources or third-party sources. They're doing the root cause analysis of these bugs, determining how things are remediated and if they're remediated well as just managing the entire bug life cycle. From there, you could take it a step higher and look at a security architect, which is more product focused. So a security architect might be working with product teams on new features and designing like secure by default designs earlier on in the feature's life cycle or before it's even being implemented. So like pre-SDL. And then finally, the last key role that we've listed is a governance and compliance lead. And this individual is responsible for managing the maturity model and the program as a whole, and really looking at handling the strategic vision of the security program within the organization. So a key aspect of what we're talking about in the different maturity levels is, especially between the medium and the high maturity levels, is what is tactical and what is strategic. So what is, doing AppSec things versus having an AppSec program. So enumerating some key differences between programs and the lack of a program. The first immediate impact that you'd see without a program is the impact on engineers. So without a program, engineers are the ones responsible for doing the security assessments of their own work, which is not allowing them to specialize in what they do best, which is building and innovation. So it's with the program, it's much more clear that the expectation is for the engineers to innovate and then the security people to do the security work with some shared responsibilities in between. So additionally, you may not have consistent or prioritized coverage across your life cycle as a development team. So you may just be doing an annual pen test right before a major release instead of doing, say, security-related training for your developers. Additionally, all the work that you may be doing is purely tactical and not looking at the long-term growth of the program. And all of it is piecemeal and irregular. As I said, it may not cover the SDLC. And then finally, a very problematic and hard to identify issue without a program is whether or not you're doing actual effective AppSec work. So you may have, so here we have a lot of hammers for mostly screws. We're talking about you have the tools to do the job, but you're misapplying them or you're not applying them effectively. So another key aspect of AppSec program that we highlighted earlier is metrics. So a very common first pass metric for a which may serve the foundation of a program for low security maturity organizations is bug counting. So I used to be a consultant, so I used to hear this all the time. You know, how many bugs did we find this time versus last time? That's a common measure for success of many organizations for their application security program. So the problem with this metric by itself is it doesn't really tell you anything. So as you know, if the response is, hey, we found a lot of bugs, what does that mean? Maybe you've hired really excellent pen testers. Maybe all the work you're doing is too late in the SDL, and you're not focusing on developer training enough. And then on the other hand, if you're looking at something like, hey, we found no bugs, maybe you're doing awesome, but maybe you didn't have the right coverage for your pen test, or maybe the security activities that you're doing are too tightly scoped to something that's not very important or doesn't have a high attack surface, and then there's all this other stuff that does and is falling apart. So bug counting in and of itself is not bad per se. It's just a single metric that is often kind of overused and overloaded for to build out a program. So with a program, you might be able to gather metrics across different aspects of your security organization. Like, for example, you may have shared metrics between AppSec and QA, like what percentage of our code bases have security integration tests. You could see how that's a useful metric without the security part for QA. Very similarly, it might be a great metric for an AppSec program. Another metric might be how do engineers receive role-focused security training. So you may do, as part of your program, some sort of training that's general purpose across all engineers, but maybe it's more effective to do some sort of training that's targeted to a specific subset of engineers. So you could, like, there's a lot of metrics here. You could start with an empty list with, you know, individuals on your team and come up with a good basis for what like a program might look like and have all these metrics over time. But really, that's kind of starting from scratch, and there's existing models that kind of help form this program. The two most prominent of which are BeSam and SAM. So these models, visually, you can see there's a lot of similarity. They define about 4 higher level categories that cover security or business functions within a security team, and then each of those individually have a subset of categories within them. So digging in a little bit deeper, we can see that there's still quite a few similarities between these two programs. For example, they've been around for about a decade. They're still recently having updates. And as I mentioned earlier, like the number of high-level groupings as well as subcategories are within the same ballpark. But the key difference between these two models is that BeSam is a real-world data set and SAM is an ideal state data set. Alternatively, we could say that BeSam is descriptive and SAM is prescriptive. So in a specific example taking from each of these two maturity models, something like code signing in BeSam would be describing in general what their data set, which is about 109 organizations, are doing for code signing. It kind of rounds out some of the subtleties of each one and kind of generalizes it across all the 100 plus organizations. So it's not so much how-to, whereas SAM is a bit closer to how you might want to implement it, looking at like the ideal state of when you should code sign, what you should coincide, how you should do it, etc. So as I mentioned, these two programs are quite similar. I think the key takeaway between their similarities is that they are both useful in defining this maturity model, but their differences make it as such that both are useful by themselves, or collectively, I should say. And in both cases, these models are not checklists that are immutable, but they're the foundation of a program that should be extended and contextualized based on your personal organization. For example, the BeSam data set, the size, the general, like the average size of the companies in that data set are quite large. So maybe if you're an SMB, you may not be at that same level of the BeSam data set. So having said some things about application security teams generally, we can look at how we started to build an AppSec program at Duo. So AppSec at Duo, or I guess security at Duo, is a bit more complex than just application security. We actually have about 6 different teams who are all handling different aspects of security at Duo. For example, product research. A product R&D team is responsible for identifying new and innovative features that may be useful for our product, and then implementing them as like an initial proof of concept and then handing that off to engineering to finish out. So right here, this is a separate team than application security, yet from the very beginning, we have security experts working on new features before it even gets into, say, like the actual engineering lifecycle. Or take, for example, data science. We can leverage our data science team to measure, say, metrics about what customers are using what features. So maybe in an incident response scenario, we can enumerate the actual real-world impact or the practical impact on our customers more intelligently. So I think the key takeaway here is, yes, there's a lot of security employees or security-focused employees at Duo, but what we get to do as an AppSec team is really focus on AppSec ourselves and not worry about other security worries within the organization because we're all working collaboratively on different things. Additionally, we encourage rotations within these different security organizations within Duo so we can have different perspectives on different teams and really diversify our experience. So honing in a little bit further and focusing on AppSec specifically within Duo, we've drawn out a BeSam 8 metric on the ratio of the software security group to software engineers over that data set. So BeSam 8, their data set suggests that there's 1.6 software security group members, which are the people that are responsible for software security within an organization, per 100 engineers. In contrast, at Duo, we have about 8.3 security-focused, or just application security engineers per 100 engineers. So the big takeaway is we're happy with this number. We think it's good. It makes us proud. But over time, especially coming into like early next year, we're looking to increase this number. And it's also worth mentioning that we are hiring across several security teams. So if you want to contribute to this ratio increase, you should definitely reach out. Another key aspect of our application security program is our team values. So before we get into what we do specifically, I think it helps to frame how we think about our day-to-day work and how it impacts the people that we're working with. So our first team value is engineering is family. So as an AppSec team, your work that you're doing is inherently adversarial. However, we never want the relationship with engineering to be adversarial. So this means that we must take every possible chance we can to be empathetic and understand what our output means for our #1 customer. Whether that's, say, clear and concise communications, making sure we understand the impact before we go speaking to engineering, or doing some decent effort root cause analysis to kind of point engineering in the right direction. Maybe engineering knows best and can actually do a much more thorough root cause analysis, but still worthwhile doing. It saves them time and grows us individually as well. And then another key aspect of engineering family is just being available, being thoughtful, and being patient. Our second team value is low friction, high value. So it's relatively easy to come along and make changes that change with no. Sorry, that GIF is so distracting. It's easy to make changes without any regard to how engineering operates. But at Duo, we want to make sure that whatever changes we are making, we're being considerate about what that means to engineering. We want to be less about roadblocks and more about roundabouts. We don't want to be doing security work that's the physical equivalent of, say, tapping a knife on a pickle jar trying to get it open. Our next team value is build a paved road. So with building a paved road, we want to make sure that we, as AppSec, are not the roadblocks to engineering's work, but more along the lines of guardrails. So we want to make sure that engineering is doing their job quickly and efficiently and are acting confidently. So what we'll do is we promote standards and define the AppSec way of doing things, or the Duo AppSec way, I should say, and make sure we promote that internally with engineering and make them effective at innovation. The fourth team value we have is how could it go right? So we want to make sure that as an AppSec team, we are not the no or the anti-feature team. We want to embrace innovation, and instead of telling, say, a product team that they can't do something, we want to steer them in the right direction to maximize both security and functionality. And then our final team value is no code left behind. It's with the agility and efficiency of engineering teams these days, it's quite easy to get overwhelmed by the volume of code that's being shipped. And it might be easy to get distracted by the new and shiny while there's still old code that hasn't been touched in some time. So however we operate our program, we want to make sure that we understand the full software inventory and that our testing is accounting for older code. And then for now, I'll pass it over to Mark, who will talk about our application security program specifically and how we've implemented it.
All right. Is this good? Yeah. All right. So with our program, we've introduced you to BeSam and SAM. These are maturity models. These are the basis that you can start a program from. What we've actually done at Duo is done an abstraction layer on that we call DASM, or Duo Application Security Maturity Model. We do this for a few reasons, which we'll talk about and what the values we get. But similar to the other pictures we showed you before, you've got 4 key areas, you've got a handful of groupings, and then under those groupings you have activities. So the same architectural sense of what that is kind of unchanged. We just consolidate both BeSam and SAM into one maturity model. So how we pull that together is we unify on a few things that make sense to us. So we can have coverage scoring that is basically the same that SAM implements, but then extend that to BeSam. We can provide, different outputs from just SAM data or just BeSam data or all of the data together. Gives us different perspectives, because when you have the real world data set, you have the hypothetical ideal state data set, you kind of want to pull value from both, but how do you do that if you just choose one or the other, right? We also have a prioritization scheme that's very simple, more from the perspective of we need to do this if we ever think we're going to be successful at an AppSec program, and stuff that we just really don't believe in. So a good example of stuff we don't believe in is, requiring sign-offs. This is fake data, but like the score is actually right on that one. The sign-off thing to us is not how we build an AppSec program. We have structures in place to make sure stuff doesn't go out without like some sort of review, but people are not waiting for us to look at every like 2-line code diff and white space fix. That's a really, really poor way to build relationships with engineering, and it frustrates the business and slows people down. So for our program itself, we can, for instance, think about what activities we want to see in SAM, because again, as an OWASP project, we can commit data to that SAM project and say, we notice you have these activities. We have this other set of like 5 activities that we really believe in. You don't have it in your model yet. Like, could we make that happen? And so we can influence how other organizations think of their maturity model if we look at SAM. So we can abstract over all that, add things to us as we need it, and we can also remove things from our view. So the cool thing is we track all the data for BeSam and SAM, like underneath the hood, and we will always track all the data for BeSam and SAM. But we won't always leverage that data. We will have it if we need it. So the one thing about metrics, and there's some good stuff from like John Allspaw and some other, very metric-centric IT people, you can only ever check the data that you've ever recorded, right? You can infer, I think like 4 years ago we were kind of thinking this way and now we're thinking that way. If you don't have the data, you're never going to know for sure. And so we capture the data over time, even if we don't think it's important now. As the company evolves, as our team evolves, we might go, oh wow, I wish we had that. Now we can make better decisions. For us, it's not a checklist. This isn't, we have to do everything. There's a lot of things you can do, and there's a lot of prioritization you have to think about. And finally, the overall thing that we conveyed to engineer when we released this maturity model as the basis for our program is like, you as engineer don't have to worry about this. This isn't your responsibility. This is something you have to like know what priority and what coverage all these individual things are. That's our job. What we will do is convey, this is the thing we want to improve this quarter. Here's how our relationship with you can make that a thing. So we want to have something that they can look at and go, oh yeah, I get it, but not make them feel overwhelmed from it. It allows us to work with compliance better. So if we have an auditor come in and says, hey, how do you build your AppSec program? Well, we can show them that. But if they say, well, I get what you're doing here, but I only believe BeSam is a thing. Like if that's, as an auditor, I only know what BeSam is. Well, we can give them all the BeSam data and make them happy, and we can give them all the SAM data, or we can give them our big picture view. So we have variety there that we can work with. For us, every single task we do in a quarter, so if we're project planning for, we're into Q4 now, we map all of the work we're doing in this quarter to this maturity model. And so we should be able to say at the end of that quarter, okay, we finished the goals we had said, they map this way. Did we actually move the needle in coverage? Did we move the needle in the maturity of the technologies we deploy or the ways that we handle engineering needs? And if the answer is no, then maybe we picked the wrong projects that quarter. If the answer is yes, then we decide, okay, are we doubling down on that next quarter, or are we going in a different direction? Like, have we learned something that we didn't know? So again, it's just keeping ourselves honest and having something to work towards. Within the program, beyond the maturity side, we also think about how can we maximize efficiency and not spend a lot of time thrashing around trying to, do stuff, but not really make, real accomplishments. We use a lot of standards in the industry. We don't try to come up with like a new cool, like risk model or something. There's plenty of these out there. We use everything from open standards like BugCrowd's VRT for vulnerability prioritization, and some categorization, and Dread and Stride, and all the things that many of you might use in your own programs for all your InfoSec. And what this lets us do is really focus on what we want to make important changes in, and the areas that we feel passionately about. For instance, the PSTERT framework is something that's not released yet, but we've given feedback to. So there was an RFC period, and we contributed our points of view on that. So we will help the industry by leveraging industry standards, and we will help ourselves by having less on our plate to come up with and actually focus on AppSec in kind. We work well with a lot of the teams at Duo beyond just engineering. So QA, we share tooling with them. So we've taught them how to use Burp Suite. Burp Suite is a hacker tool to them, but it's a QA tool. Like QA and AppSec is basically the same job with different outputs, right? Like, oh, this SQL thing broke. I should fix the SQL thing. Versus us is like, oh, you got SQL injection. Like, it's the same bug. It's just a different perspective. And so we actually have a great force multiplication if we leverage that team in an efficient and collaborative way. Product, we're in AppSec, we read all the news, we see what the trends are, we see how people are getting owned in the real world, and so if we're thinking about how our products are evolving, we are an input and advisor to the product team to make sure that we are going in a direction that individual security people, we can like say, oh yeah, that would help me if I was running this program over here at a different company. And then finally, compliance, beyond just kind of mapping out what we're doing with like the maturity model, we support customer inquiries. Hey, what does your team do? Fill out this questionnaire. Or if we are taking in a new vendor as a company, we want to do some due diligence on our part to make sure the vendors we're using are also secure. And so we can do, code analysis or dynamic testing to help support that function of the corporate security team in that case, and use the talent we do have in AppSec to make that easier on them. Within content of within the community content thing, so we're here presenting, so check like that, good. We do blog posts, we talk to the press to make sure that we convey what we know or think we know about AppSec. And then, like I said, we support industry standards, we do public policy reform, like DMCA stuff, and then security research when we have free time is definitely a thing we do as well. Ultimately, number one, as Kelby said, engineering, right? We work with product, we work with QA, but our software engineers are the people that we focus our most time on. This is the Microsoft SDL. Some of you might have seen it or leverage it. When we do the work beyond the maturity model, we map how we do work for engineering with the SDL because it maps to the SDLC. So we try to speak the same language and have good commonality with our engineers. We're not trying to, again, confuse them. We want to make things as clear and as effective as possible. And if you look at like a filter, this is basically what we're trying to do. And I think the one thing people don't get right about SDL implementation is they see it as like, okay, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Really how the SDL I think should work and how we treat it is that it's a funnel. We are putting a lot of time and effort to the top because those have better outcomes and longer lasting value and scale better. When we get down to response, which is like, hey, someone found a bug in our stuff, that's a very lossy process. It's expensive in headcount. For AppSec, for engineering, it's expensive to the business. There could be legal implications. We have to talk to customers. We might lose brand value. Response is what you don't want to be spending all your time doing. So we want to spend time training our engineers. We want to spend time doing secure design reviews. And so in the training sense, we do some cool stuff. We have this quarter starting, all new engineers will fill out a survey that we've put together, which kind of takes in what do they want to know about AppSec? What experience, like did they have collegiate courses in InfoSec? We pretty much know the answer is no, right? What kind of opportunities have they had at other companies they've worked for? And what it does is it's informing us as who our population we're here to serve needs. So we're not just talking in a vacuum and saying like, oh, we're AppSec professionals, we know what you need. We are actually trying to understand what they need and act on that accordingly. We do like short little trainings and kind of briefings on different vulnerability classes, overall big picture training. So we actually are developing in-house training courses that are more tailored to the engineer populations we do have. And then some gamification stuff, cool card game tournaments with prizes and just other fun ways to get a different set of that engineering base to be excited about security or think a different way, gain an attacker's mindset a little bit better. The next 4 areas are just really the activities that we perform or like security services. So these are the things that we have standardized as opportunities for engineering to come to us in a formal way. Secure design review, effectively, we want the far end of the SDL to be where we're putting a lot of our time. If we can look at designs and we can see a specification or a product requirements document, we can very quickly say, that's going to be a problem area, that's a place we should spend more time on, let's walk through this a little bit more with attention, right? Once we're past that phase, we can then dive into formal like threat modeling and go, okay, we've got your data flow diagrams, we've mapped out like done threat enumeration, we've talked about mitigations, and again, we have this another inflection point to add value, to give insight, and to hopefully prevent later response stuff, right? Code audits, this is something that's just throughout the life cycle. As soon as code is, written and committed, we are game to look at it. Whether it's a small diff, a big diff, a refactor, this is something that happens a lot. It's just one of those things that we participate in. If it's a larger code base, we will, make it a formal activity and actually say, okay, we'll do a week and, do this code audit and do some static code analysis and do manual code audit, manual review of the code, and try to give insight. And it's a good time to interact with the engineers, like at their level, like Kelby and I were talking at breakfast about some security bug someone found. We're like, oh, didn't know that thing worked that way. That's super cool. And, it's just one of those things when you sit down with an engineer, they're usually just as geeked as you are to talk about security. A lot of engineers are actually really big security buffs. They're just not focused on it day in and day out. And so we can give some of that excitement to them when we talk about it. And security assessment's like the big picture review. This is like, hey, we're going to go production with this next quarter. Hey, we have a big refactor of code base or a feature. A lot of companies over-index on this step. For us, this is where we get, and we're like, okay, we probably know what we're going to find here. Okay, we know that thing in that threat model probably didn't get resolved as well as it should have. Let's put more time into that in the assessment. So this is a holistic thing, but we also, if we do the SDL and we live what we're talking about here today, it shouldn't be like, oh my God, like you have SQL injection everywhere, and why do you have all this cross-site scripting, and we don't actually think that's how a security assessment should go. When you have a third-party firm come in and do a pen test once a year, and there's nothing else in the SDL represented, that's pretty much how your reports start looking. And for the end, when we do have to, unfortunately, do the advisory stuff or handle a security vulnerability in our product line, we do try to formalize that as well and take a really strong stance. PCERT framework, again, I mentioned that earlier. We leverage ISO standards from Katie Masuris that she championed for both how we release our advisories and go through that process with a third-party reporter. Disclosure policy is published on our website. GPG key is published. We invite researchers to tell us about bugs, and we work with them. Functionally, I think one of the things that when we're talking about metrics, that's a cool thing to look at. It's 15 data points, not that we want more, but over the last 3 years of product security advisories we've released, we have these 15 that we've released. And the trend line's going in the right direction. It's not like aggressively going in the right direction, but it's going in the right direction overall. Obviously, you can tell there's a bit of an outlier there that's skewed things more. But, this is something that we want to keep going that way. And if we do have to have a response, that days to release, and this isn't days to bug fix, this is days to us publishing this to our customers. So there's other crisis communications and legal and, so we're pretty proud of that, both the trend line as well as the response rate of when we do find a security issue, we want to tackle it as quick as possible. Functionally, it's a pretty simple workflow. We have things that we do quick, and we talked about code audits. If an engineer has a question, they can hit us up on Slack. They can come to our desk. They can talk to us, at the bar. We don't get too formal if we don't have to, because it spends time on both of our sides. We get added to a lot of issues, like in our defect tracker and stuff. We will get subscribed to an issue like, hey, Kelby, can you take a look at this and let me know, does this seem like a security implication or not? And go, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down, and then go from there, right? So that's pretty easy. Really, one of the things that's worked best for us, though, is AppSec office hours. So once a week, we have a 1-hour block that, as much of the team that's available comes in one office or remotely into one office, and we're just available. And so if you want to sit down and have a thoughtful discussion, if you want to pick our brain real quick, it's dedicated time for engineering to do so. And we have had very high value conversations that did lead to, this is like a bad design that we maybe didn't know about or didn't like or this or that. And we've actually had this result in really important improvements both in the relationship with engineering as well as outcomes for our security team. If we do have to get into more, this is not a day or a couple hour problem, we do have a whole process. So we have an intake. You can just fill it out as an engineer, as an engineering manager. We just ask basic details like, what's the thing you care about? Is there a project plan? Is there a source repo? What kind of languages this is written in? What's your timeline that you need help from us on, right? And this is just a triage process. So it's very easy to get our attention, and then we can triage that and backlog it or pull it together. The other thing is, when we do that intake process, we don't know if they actually want our help. Because if you are a team that has a compliance requirement, maybe your auditor is saying, hey, if you want to pass this audit, I need a third-party review of this code base, not your internal AppSec team, which is fair. That's how, things happen. And so we actually give, and this is a very truncated, globbed up version of what we actually publish internally, but we give some insight to our engineers that will request this. What do they need? What are the properties that they're trying to accomplish here? So it's not just about us saying, oh, we'll provide everything. Don't think too hard about what you need from us. We want engineers to be thoughtful about, oh, do you need a third party? Do you need a first party? Is this a cool, like, private bug bounty opportunity? What makes sense for what you're asking us for? And this is a way to communicate that and give them options. Well, doesn't look super good, but TLDR is everything we do in these security activities, these services. It's all internally public. So as an engineer, you can see what we're working on, what we just finished. You can see report links to any of the work we've done to get an idea of the kind of stuff we could do for you. We want to make, again, transparency a number one thing. This is a very important thing to us, to have people feel welcome to talk to us and invite us into, meetings or like I said, like security issues that we can kind of evaluate. If we do have to actually do a more formal process, we have a kickoff checklist, and this says things like, make sure you give us source code access, make sure you give us project plan access, when do you want to kick off this meeting and actually talk about this in more depth? And it's just a way for everyone to know what their responsibilities are, how quickly we're moving. When we talk about metrics, right, if we start 20 of these activities, the variance in how quickly we actually get to step 1 to step 3 to step 5, that's a good metric for us. Are we understaffed? Do we have too many inbounds? Are we taking on too much work and it's not prioritized well? This is important stuff for us to think about because it lets us scale and it lets our engineering team know how to work with us. So we hack shit, like that's next. And then, which most talks, right, this is the entire talk. That's the only slide about hacking, basically. So we have a workflow for security defects. We go through that. And this is very tightly coupled again to just the overall process. This isn't a one-off. This is like every single time we have any security defects, how we triage. One of the other things we do that I've done at other places that are, as a consultant or in larger corporations, we actually produce actual deliverables internally for the work we do. There's some of the primitives of why we do that up there, but in general, we find this as similar to tracking data in like our maturity model. If we don't record it, we'll never have it again. And so if you're an engineer and you're like, hey, I just started, and you guys have had this project for 4 years, wouldn't it be nice as an engineer to look at the last 4 years of security assessments in like one holistic view and not try to like go back through your bug tracker and like piecemeal pick off what this thing looked like and what the evolution of security was? Like, we are thinking long tail, and we're thinking about not just what we need to do today, but like what are the benefits and outputs for tomorrow. So in conclusion, like, it's hard. Like, we maybe made it sound too easy, and we are considerate of that. We want to make sure that people understand that there is a lot to do. There's always a lot to do, whether you're an AppSec or something else. And the maturity model is a good basis to figure out maybe how to approach that, or maybe how to at least keep track of what you're up to. One thing is have a stakeholder, have someone, the me in this context, like have someone that just cares about this. Because if you don't, it's going to always get pushed back. It's always going to be, engineer knows what they're doing, or they're fine. They probably are doing well, but they need support too. This isn't about us. Like, we are servicing and providing care and empathy and help for them. We want to make them better at their jobs. We want to make them release code faster. We're not here to slow them down, and we can't do that if we don't have a focus on that. 2018, accelerate, grow, more coverage, more testing on the regular, not just manual, but a lot more working with our QA team to maximize time and all of that. So we started a little bit late, but hopefully we'll finish up so Mana can get on time. There's some of our contact info. We'll be around all day, so really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.